Thank you. All right, well, that was a lovely introduction, thank you. I am Chris Davila. I want to reiterate that I would like for this to be a dialogue and discussion. So at any point, at any time, if you have a question about something that I'm saying, please feel free to either shout out your question or raise your hand or however you most feel comfortable, and I will definitely respond to you, because I don't want to just stand up here and basically say words to you for 45 minutes, because then I feel like we'll all probably fall asleep. Hopefully not, though. So, okay, we're here at the University of the Incarnate Word, and I thought for briefly, how I should really approach and begin this whole discussion, but I figured we're here at Incarnate Word, so I should begin at the beginning. And so that means many, many years ago, when I was a young girl, at the age of 18, I actually received a full academic scholarship to come to, at that point, Incarnate Word College. That was many, many moons ago. And so I had a partial scholarship to go to Sarah Lawrence on the East Coast. And my parents, in their infinite knowledge, said, well, Incarnate Word is going to pay for all of your college. And Sarah Lawrence, which is, of course, an Ivy League university, was only going to give me partly, part funding, I should say. And so my parents said, we won't have to pay for you to fly there, and we won't have to pay for you to live there. And so you should just stay here and go to Incarnate Word. And so, my parents are wonderful in their own ways, but that sort of sealed the deal, right? So I stayed here in San Antonio and I didn't go off to an Ivy League college. And so then my own infinite wisdom took over at that point. So I came for a year to Incarnate Word, and in that year, ladies, I met a guy. And he wasn't the right kind of guy for me. I know, I can see some laughing faces here. He was not the right kind of guy for me. And if I could go back to 18-year-old Chris Davila, I would probably slap me a few times and be like, what the hell were you thinking? So by the end of that first year, I was deeply, deeply in love with this guy who was terrible for me. And my parents hated him, which only made me like him all the more, right? I couldn't stop. I had to have him. We had to be together. And so at that point, I wasn't even drinking or anything yet. I was just still a very young, impressionable young girl. And so this guy was like, oh, you don't know about whiskey. Let me show you about some whiskey, right? So then I would be coming home late at night. And then eventually my dad said to me, you know what? You need to live, if you're living in my house, you need to live under my rules. And so that, in this exact classroom, I was thinking about this before the lecture started. In this exact classroom, I took a class on logic. And I think these green mint walls have not been painted in probably all those years since, because I remember them quite well. And so I basically decided at that point, logically enough, that if my dad said that I couldn't behave that way living under his roof, then that was going to be it. So I said, fine, screw you and your rules, I'm moving out, right? I was 18, going on 19, and I thought I was, real big girl at that point, but let me tell you, I wasn't, right? So I moved out on my own with this guy. Needless to say, that didn't go well. I lost my scholarship. I pissed it all away, my full academic scholarship. What kind of a smart girl was I? I was not. That's the point. So don't do that. Number one, that's the first lesson. Do not piss away any sort of academic scholarship or funding that you have or that you're receiving, because those things are so important. There's so many other students out there who perhaps don't have access to that funding that you do, and so don't take advantage of that, right? And same thing with your school loans. Don't go get a school loan and go buy a car or a bunch of new clothes. If you're going to take out school loans, it needs to be for your schooling and for your education. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So then, of course, I had to get a job. So I was off living in the real world. I hated the guy that I was living with. I knew it was the first night that I moved in with that guy, in my mind, I had the thought that this is the absolute worst decision I've ever made as then an adult. But the other side of me is also very sort of stubborn and strong-headed. So there's no way in the world that I was going to call my mom and be like, okay, I knew I fucked up. Please let me come back home. No way. I've thought, Chris, you made your bed, you're going to lie in it, right? So that's what I did. I lived with that guy, and I was working 3 jobs at one point to support the both of us, because he was a real good guy, once again. And so, eventually, thankfully, I got out of that situation. I ended up moving back in with my parents. I got a full-time job at that point. But then there I was working with a full-time job as an administrative assistant, which I hated, couldn't stand it, sucked. And so then I met this guy, I got married, and now we're like in the midpoint of my 20s, right? Because right now, presently today, I'm almost 42. At this point, I was like 25, 26. Met this guy, really liked him. He was like, hey, you know what? You're a smart girl. Why aren't you in school? Why are you just an administrative assistant, right? You need to go get your butt in school and do something. And in that time between, the time that I left Incarnate Word and that I met this, my ex-husband, we'll call him, I went to school on and off several times part-time. But I think, if any of you know, going to school part-time, it just feels like you're never going to get through it, right? It's such a mountain to climb, basically, in addition to doing everything else you are in your life. And if you're a married person, you're trying to make dinner for your husband and all that sort of thing, right? Which is what I was trying to do. Watch the looks, man. So I finally decided, well, I'll let this guy maybe quiet down a little. So basically there was, a few years into my marriage, I had a big, huge thing that happened in my life. And that was basically, I found out that my husband had cheated on me. And to that point in my life, I know the person that was Chris Davila at that point thought that she was just going to be a wife and a mother for like all the years of the rest of her life. And when I think about that now, that really kind of blows my mind, because I'm totally not that person anymore, and I'm not, in that role or doing those types of things. So it seems so weird and so foreign to me. But that situation changed the entire course of my life. And in reality, I'm so grateful, and I tell my ex-husband even now, because we are friends now, that, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I am right now, standing in front of you guys. Because again, I thought at that point I was just going to be a wife and a mother. I wasn't super concerned about trying to have a career. And so when that happened, it made me realize that there's a chance that this whole marriage thing might not really last and work out for like the rest of my life the way I thought it was going to. And so that was really sort of earth-shattering for me, and I figured I needed to really figure things out on my own and figure out, up to that point, I was really only concerned about my ex-husband and, making sure he was okay and his clothes were okay and, whatever, the house was okay and all that kind of stuff. But that moment in time changed my life and my mind and my thinking, that I needed to think about me and what was going to happen with me for the rest of my life and not put someone else first. So that's my next lesson, is think about what you want in your life and what you want out of your life, and not what your mom wants, not what your dad wants, not, what your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, not what anybody else wants. You have to really just look at your life and yourself and think about, what do you want? Because ultimately, it's yourself that you have to live with for the rest of your life, right? So if you decide you want to do something with your life in terms of a career that, you can't really, stand doing. Like, I didn't love being an administrative assistant, and I hated the thought and the idea of waking up every day and going to this corporate place, for the rest of my life. I just thought it was stifling me. I couldn't take it anymore. So I made a decision at that point, and by that point, that was about 10 years ago now. So I was in my early 30s. I was about 31 years old, 32, and I decided, okay, Chris, this is it. So figure out what you want to do with your life. You need to go back to school. You need to go back to school full time and figure out what a career is that you're going to love, something that you're passionate about, and something that you want to make a career out of, basically. So I thought long and hard about the things that I liked. I thought about, I made lists of like the places that I like to go, with my family, with my friends. I made lists of, the people that I hung out with and, what did they like to do, where did they like to go, and just places where I spent my time, right? Like, what was I doing on the weekend, and just writing those things down. Because you'll really be surprised if you write things down. I think even after a week and you come back to it, you'll really be surprised about whether it's, you're writing about what you're eating or where you're going. Like, those things matter, and sometimes, there's patterns that happen that you should really kind of go back and look at and examine. And so that's really how I came to art history. And so I decided at that point I was going back to UTSA. I had only been to Incarnate Word prior to that. And so UTSA has a really great art history program. And because I had only been here to Incarnate Word, I lost several classes in the transfer, because of course, Incarnate Word is a Catholic university, right? So I lost courses in the transfer. And then of course, I had done different I had sort of taken, at first when I started here at Incarnate Word, I think the very first major I had was political science, and then that changed to English, and then ultimately after that I think it was business, like just general business. But that was like, ugh. I mean, I don't know anybody, if y'all are a business major, God, I mean, good luck to you, because wow, it's a lot of like words and stuff, right? I don't know. So then, okay, so moving to UTSA, and I switched to art history, and so I had to take a bunch more classes, and it took me, I went full time, it took me probably about 2.5 years to get through the whole program going full time, but I did. But at that point, when I went back to school, I was working, again, still as an administrative assistant, and I went to my bosses at work because I didn't want to quit my job. You know, I had worked there with this particular company by that point for like 9 years, and so I thought, you know, I was making a pretty good amount of money at that point too. So I had, you know, I came up with this whole plan in my mind, and I figured, you know, I went in to talk to my boss, and I was like, hey, look, I want to go back to school full time. But that means like during the daytime, full time. And so that means I want to work here part time, right? And I was prepared at that point for my boss to say, well, you know, Chris, we can't support that, right? We need someone here full time. So if you can't do full time, then you got to hit the road. And I was fully prepared at that point that, if they told me no, I couldn't do that, then, you know, I would hit the road and go work, you know, at like Barnes and Noble or something part-time to like have some cash, right? And so, but fortunately they were great to me there, and they were like, hey, look, that just means we're only gonna have to pay you less, right? And I was like, hey, you're right, this all works out. And so they were great to me, they let me work part-time. So I went to UTSA, I did my schoolwork there. As part of my degree plan, I had to do an internship, right? So internships are important, especially if you don't know where you want to be, right? So people always ask me, well, how do I get a job in the arts? Or how do I get a job at McNay? Or how do I get a job at Blue Star? One of those types of places, right? Internships are very, very important, okay? So especially with an arts organization, if you think about arts organizations or museums or large gallery spaces here in San Antonio, there really are not a huge amount of them, right? So the jobs that are available within those organizations are really, it's a finite number, right? So oftentimes the best way to get into an organization is through and via an internship. So I thought to myself, okay, where would be a cool place to work, right? Where would I think I would have a good time? And so I picked up the phone and I called this place, which is the McNay Art Museum, and I was like, hey, I want to work for free, because that's basically what an internship is, right? And they were like, okay, well, send us a resume with your background, and then we'll see where we could fit you in. And then a day later, a woman from the McNay, her name was Marjorie Van Beekum, she called me, she worked in the education office, and she said, Chris, your background would be perfect. They were doing an exhibition at that point that was on, it was called Mexico and Modern Printmaking, and so it was really sort of right up my alley. My concentration is contemporary Latino arts, which is how I think Dr. Lopez and I sort of travel in those kind of like Chicano circles, Chicano art circles, right? And so, so Marjorie was like, come on down and work for us. So I said, okay, cool. Now, we're gonna take a brief sojourn into the McNay at this point, right? So now I think y'all can probably tell me who the artist on your right is, right? That is not, in fact, a Louis Chavez. Anybody else? On the left or the right, either one. I'm trying to think. It's y'all's left. Okay.
Unless the students take this one.
I'm sorry, what was that?
You don't know. I don't.
Okay, so what about the other? The guitar and the wine glass on this side? No, sir, it is not. No? So I think we all can realize that this is Picasso, right?
Yeah.
Right? Now, in fact, the artwork on the other side, which is a collage, is also a Mr. Pablo Picasso. Now, everyone who comes to the McNay sees the portraits like these. Like, this is a portrait of Sylvette done in 1954, and she is mostly always on view at the McNay, because when people come to the McNay, it's like the Sistine Chapel, right? Or when people go to the Vatican, they just want to see that. When people walk in the front door, they're like, where is Picasso? Where is Van Gogh? They just want to see the highlights. But what a lot of people do not realize is the collage that we have here, also owned by the McNay, also by Mr. Picasso, done in 1912, one of the very first collage works that Mr. Picasso did. So in fact, this piece, the guitar and wine glass, which is shown here to be a comparable size as Sylvette. Sylvette is probably, 4 feet by 5 feet on the wall. It's a really large piece. Guitar and wine glass is actually it's probably like 16 by 20. So it's significantly smaller, but financially, it is worth way more than Portrait of Sylvette. And that's because Portrait of Sylvette, again, was done much later in Picasso's career, 1954. This collage, 1912, was done much earlier in his career, and again, one of the very few, and actually one of the first collages he ever did. So, the next time you come to the McNay, you will know to look for the guitar and wine glass, because everybody asks for Sylvette, right? So that's my one little tip for you at the McNay. Okay, so then I'm doing my internship there at the McNay, having a great time. It's a beautiful place, right? How could you not love working there? And so I think to myself, okay, well, how do I get a job here, right? I already have the internship. I'm coming here every day. It was in the summertime. I was supposed to be done with school like that following fall. This was a summertime class, a summertime curriculum. And so I worked there the whole summer, but I discovered what they needed, right? So I have a note here, develop or make known a skill you have that they may need, right? So when I was working there in the education, I noticed that they needed help with graphic design work. So they would have all of these, like things that came out of education, like postcards talking about activities that were going to happen through the education department. And all of that graphic design was produced within the education department. Now, when I had worked previously as an administrative assistant, I was basically forced into learning InDesign. And I didn't really want to do that at that point. I was like, this is just something else. Like, I'm an administrative assistant. Isn't it good enough that I know Excel? Seriously, you're going to make me learn this weirdo InDesign program, right? Like, why would I want to learn that? And remember, this was like 15 years ago. Who even knew about InDesign? I think it was even Publisher, perhaps. At that point, it might not even have been InDesign. And so I didn't really want to do it, but they forced me to learn Publisher/InDesign so that I could create this newsletter at this environmental engineering firm that I worked for. So then when I started to work and do my internship at the McNay, and I realized that they needed graphic design work, as much as I didn't really enjoy graphic design at that point because I didn't know much outside of very sort of basic things, once I figured out that they needed help with graphic design work, I was like, that's my in, right? Because I'm an intern, right? I am free money to them at this point. So if I can, create some graphic design that they can use for free, then these people are going to keep me around, right? So that's what I did. I was like, okay, what do you need? Tell me what you need. Tell me what you want. And so then I just started making things, and just showing up. That's the other thing, showing up. So my internship was over at the end of the summer. I was into my last semester of school, which was in the fall, and I just kept showing up. I figured if I keep showing up here like every day as much as I can, then eventually when a job opens up, they're gonna be like, hey, Chris, there's a job open. So I was in that last semester of school. I was taking like 15 hours of classes to finish. I was still working part-time as an administrative assistant. And then in all the free time I had, I was going to the McNay to work, all the free time I had. And so I did that for 2 more months into that fall semester. And then finally a job came open and they were like, hey, Chris, there's a job open. And sure enough, I got the job. And so that's how I got into the McNay. I had the job there probably about a month and a half before I graduated from school. I graduated at the end of that semester in the fall with a degree in art history, and I was working in education at the McNay. And so that's basically how I got there, was through that internship and showing up every day. So again, people ask me, well, how can I even figure out what I want to do? Well, I knew enough to go and do an internship in a museum because I knew that that's sort of the direction that I wanted to take. But we're all kind of different people here. So, I mean, even if you're interested in banking or if you're interested in, being a lawyer, you can go and be an intern in a museum, or, myself, I could have gone to be an intern in a lawyer's firm or what have you. So just don't be afraid to kind of explore and make those connections again, and kind of just put yourself out there. Because even, again, if you're not interested in learning to be a lawyer eventually, being an intern will give you a lot of insight. No matter what it is, no matter what industry it is. As an intern, you can figure out sort of the personalities of an organization. So, say I worked at the McNay and realized like, man, it's nothing but a bunch of bitches there, right, in education, then I never would have, wanted to work there. But I realized like, okay, well, these are all nice people and I want to work here. So, it kind of showed me a lot of things. It showed me, how they work their financials. It showed me how they treat their volunteers outside of just interns, You can really learn a lot about an organization, even if you're just volunteering your time there. So I feel like internships are really kind of a big thing. So I left the McNay after a couple of years, and I went to work on the west side with an organization called the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. And so I was originally hired there as the exhibition coordinator, which meant I was coordinating, exhibitions that happened in their gallery space there. With a nonprofit, you oftentimes have to wear multiple hats. So of course, I was basically like throwing out chairs and sweeping the floors and, doing everything in between because it is a nonprofit, right? So working there at the Guadalupe, not the first, but the second exhibition that I worked on was with an all-female collective called Masrudas. And so they are stationed here out of San Antonio. And so this was actually their second show, I believe. And they did it here at the Guadalupe. And it was a brilliant show. My pictures here are not so great. But basically, they did an install within the entire space of the gallery space there. And they painted all of these amazing scenes in brown paint on all the gallery walls. And then they added in different, paraphernalia like fences and, there was some video work that was done. And so we had, TVs placed all around on the floor, and the TVs showed videos of dogs in the street. And basically, the title of the show was Canis Familiaris, and it was basically all about, the level of stray dogs that really happen and live on the west side streets of San Antonio. So the show was really bringing to light a huge problem that exists in San Antonio. And so, I met, but also in doing this show, I met these women from Masrudas, and that was also another really big sort of turning point in my life for me, just because I think it was really kind of the first time that I met 5 women at that point, who were sort of like-minded in terms of, the style of art that we liked, and then also our ideas about, how art should be presented or shown, or, just kind of like art ideas in general, right? So we really sort of all gelled together, and I love these ladies. They're fabulous women, right? And you should check them out. They have a website, masrudas.com. So 2010 and social media, as Dr. Lopez alluded to earlier. So let's see if I have this photo here. So social media really started coming about 2007, 2008, 2009, right? I think I joined Twitter in maybe like 2009. And so, this is sort of social media explained, right? Like if you read through here, it tells you exactly what each of these different platforms and networks really represent, right? So Twitter, okay, we're eating a donut. Facebook, you like donuts, right? Foursquare, which is still out there, now they call it Swarm. This is where I eat donuts. It's a location app, right? Instagram, here's a vintage photo of my donut. YouTube, here I am eating a donut. LinkedIn, my skills include donut eating. Pinterest, here's a donut recipe. Last.fm, which I guess for us now would be Spotify, now listening to donuts, and then of course Google+. I'm a Google employee who eats donuts, because who's on Google but maybe just Google employees, I don't know. So I used to go and watch MMA fights, UFC, with these 2 guy friends of mine from high school all the time. At this point, around 2009, 2010, 2011. And so, we would go and watch the fights, but one of the guys, he was like always on social media, always talking about social media. If we weren't talking about the fight or what was going on with the fight, then he would be telling me about like, oh, there's this, new way of file sharing, or there's this new this, or there's this new that. Always late. Come in, boys. Ladies and gentlemen, the cool kids have arrived. So I would go watch UFC with these guys. one of the guys was always on me about social media and Twitter. And, you know, he was actually really instrumental in sort of pushing me into my foray and the extent that I really have, you know, explored social media. And so this is, of course, Cain Velasquez, who at one point defeated Brock Lesnar to become the first Mexican-American heavyweight champion of the world of the UFC. Brown pride. I love Cain Velasquez. So in terms of social media, though, and social media in terms of being an artist. So there are several social networks that I always recommend to people, or artists in general, that you should really sort of partake, right? If you are trying to sell your artwork online, then these are excellent avenues for you to explore. So Twitter, of course, Instagram, super easy, Pinterest, YouTube, Facebook. And when I say Facebook, Facebook can either be your own personal page or it can be a fan page, right? One of those two things. But basically, essentially, this is the way that people are really digesting their information now, right? Is through social media. So you have lots of people out there who, you know, maybe they don't have cable, maybe, you know, they don't even have a TV at home, but of course, you know, they have their phone, right? Everybody has an iPhone or some sort of smartphone, or you have, you know, a computer at home, a laptop, something like that, right? So this is how social media is really how people are digesting their information, digesting the news, and all kinds of good stuff. So this is really the avenue that you want to go down if you really are looking to sell your work. So in my humble opinion, and I know the gallerists who walked in who probably won't agree with me, but I think that a traditional gallery space is really sort of dead, right? Because I think people go to openings now, gallery openings, and they're more concerned about, you know, where's the beer, where's the liquor, and, you know, very often don't really take the time to look at what's up on the walls, right? Much less take the time to make a purchase. So I really believe the more and more as time progresses that the way that people are going to be purchasing art more and more is through these channels and via these channels. So again, if you're an artist, if you're interested in selling your work online, then you should definitely be exploring all or at least some of these social networks. That's my next big point to all of you. Now, consulting in any field, right, is always an option. So at that point, after I worked at the Guadalupe for a couple of years, I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, and so I left the Guadalupe. So at that point, I sort of like struck out on my own. But the big part of all of this too, and Dr. Lopez sort of touched on this also, is relationships and connections, right? So without the relationships and the connections that I've had in my life, I, again, wouldn't be in the spot that I am right now. So once I left the Guadalupe, I kind of went out onto my own. Then the McNay basically has always, you know, will always have a wonderful soft spot in my heart, because they basically said, you know what, you're not working there at the Guadalupe anymore, and we have this great opportunity, and will you come and work with us, right? We'll pay you contract, come and work with us. And I was like, sure. And so the McNay continues to do that for me. They've been so great and so awesome. But this was how I met Dr. Lopez. So the McNay hired me. Basically, they were going to hold a show there, Estampas de la Raza, and they hired me to basically program that entire exhibition. So programming for that exhibition meant that, you know, there was a whole series of talks, there was a film series, there was, you know, artists and artist panels who flew in, artists who were part of the exhibition and who flew in. There were education workshops related to that. It was just basically every program around that exhibition, I programmed that exhibition. And so again, I met Dr. Lopez because I had Barbara Renaud Gonzalez, who's a local author and wrote a book on Willie Velasquez, who is a voting rights pioneer, was a voting rights pioneer. And Dr. Lopez and, what's your partner's name? Kay, that's right. Kay actually came up with a digital book that was going to basically, the book itself is entirely digital, isn't it?
Yes, and we're actually doing a first version right now.
Oh, okay, awesome. So that's actually how I met Dr. Lopez originally, was through working at the McNay, and the exhibition came about because Doctors Romo, Ricardo, and Harriet, they have a huge collection of Latino art, huge. And so they made a huge donation to the McNay to say, hey, we're going to give you some artwork. But here's the other key, right? Like anybody can donate artwork to a museum, anybody. If you die right now tomorrow, Louis Chavez can leave all the artwork he wants to the McNay. But that doesn't guarantee you, here's the key, that does not ever guarantee that Louis Chavez will ever have his work shown at the McNay. They'll take your work, sure. They'll throw it in a big, storage somewhere, but that doesn't guarantee that that work is ever going to go out or that anyone else will ever see it outside of people who work at the museum. So Dr. Romo said, hey, McNay, we want to donate over 250 prints and drawings, but the stipulation is we give you these prints, you got to do a show. And not like 10 years from now, like soon. We give you these prints, you got to do a show. And that was the brilliant move on his part, because if it wasn't for that, this show would not have happened, which has now traveled across the US a little bit. And it was originally meant to just be a show that was here in San Antonio, and it wasn't going to go any further. So that was really a huge big deal and a huge opportunity for me, and another kind of avenue that I explored in terms of museum programming, right? Because I'm kind of trying to break it down for you guys in terms of each of the kind of the steps that I've taken and what I've done along the way, right? So I've done that. And then special projects. So somewhere around like 2011 to 2012, I think, the city of San Antonio approached me and they said, hey, we have this show, right? And it was produced through their kind of, it's like the arts arm of the city. Right now they're called DCCD, which is like the Department of Creative and Cultural Development, something like that, right? So they approached me and said, hey, we're doing this show. It's like a 30-minute online show. And we want somebody else to come in and do, like a little interview part that wouldn't be more than like a minute long, right? And will you do that? And I had never done anything on camera to that point, but I like to explore. And so if somebody asked me to do something I've never done, I'm like, hell yeah, let's go, right? So they said, hey, come on, do you want to do this? And I was like, hell yeah, let's go. And so then, but I foolishly thought like, okay, well, they're gonna tell me what to do, right? Because I already told them I don't know how to do this. So then I said, okay, well, who am I gonna talk to? And they said, well, I don't know, that's up to you. And I was like, okay, well, what am I gonna ask them? And they said, well, I don't know, that's up to you. You're having the conversation, right? And I'm like, okay, well, please tell me you're gonna have at least a camera because I can't even deal, right? If you're not gonna do that part. And so they were like, yeah, we got all that, but you gotta come up with the rest. So I was like, okay, I get to pick who I wanna talk to and I get to figure out what I'm gonna say. Like, wow, this is really kind of cool. But remember, originally the idea was it was gonna be a minute to 60 to 90 seconds is what they told me. So the very first interview I did is not pictured. It was Jimmy James Canales. And so Jimmy came in and he's kind of a crazy guy. In case, if you don't know him, he's really sort of a crazy dude. And so he comes in, we get through the interview, and we're in this room, it's like, it's a studio, there's a booth and all that kind of good stuff. So I look over to the booth to, the people who are sort of directing me and like, okay, was that good? And they're like, yeah, they give me the thumbs up, like, yeah, it was great. So I'm like, okay, good, perfect, right? So I stand up and I start sort of, taking off the mic and all that sort of thing. And the guy comes out from the booth and I said, okay, well, that felt a little long though, right? Because I figured it was supposed to be 90 seconds. And he was like, it was fine. It was like 5.5 minutes. And I'm like, shoot, 5.5 minutes. I guess we're gonna have to really edit that down. And he was like, no. He was like, I think that was good. So just go with 5.5 minutes. And I had 2 other people that I was interviewing right after that. And so we stuck with that. About 5.5, 6 minutes was the length of the interviews. And so I picked who I was going to talk with. I picked what we were going to talk about. And, a lot of times we would show their artwork in the background. This is Chung-Hee Moon, and that's her work. And so, so that was a fun and interesting sort of little foray. I had never done anything in terms of video production at that point, hence the white pants. Who wears white pants on video? I don't know. Not me anymore, okay? So I'm actually sort of reprising the Chris Connection at that point. Originally it was called Chris's Connection at that point. And so it's taken on a couple of iterations since then. The city stopped production in 2012. They stopped doing the entire video shoot that they were doing, their video program. And so that of course cut off my part of it. But I really kind of determined that I liked talking to people. I liked learning about everyone's history and their past, because to me that's important. I honestly feel like if we do not document ourselves, we cannot rely on anyone else to do that for us. And so when I looked around at that point and even now to figure out like, okay, where do we go for some sort of Latino archive, right? So like if I wanted to look up an artist like Vincent Valdez, who's pictured up here on your right, where could I find information about him? Like what were Vincent's influences, and who was Vincent influenced by? Like who were the artists that Vincent was influenced by, right? Like I had all these questions in my mind, and so I felt like the video series was a really good way to accomplish that, right? So I'm continuing that on now. In terms of other special projects, as Dr. Lopez alluded to, so there was South by San Anto. So this was really basically like a friend of mine from Austin said, hey, you know what, you should just rent a truck and fill it up with art and come up to South by. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? That ended up being a little bit more of an expensive trip that I had anticipated, because I paid for, renting the van and, the gas for the van. And then also, there was that big branch that I managed to really bust into that knocked out the corner right here on the other side. So that was a big learning lesson for me, that whole trip. But basically, it was a great idea. So again, in terms of talking about social media, the whole idea behind the truck was the hashtag of South by San Anto, right? So then basically everything that I did, I used those hashtags, right? So this was Foursquare, of course it's Swarm now, as I noted earlier. But I checked in, using the hashtag South by San Anto everywhere that I went, right? And that was connected to Twitter. My Instagram was connected to Twitter. So basically I just had to post in one place, and then that information went out to everywhere, right? But again, keeping it all onto Twitter so that people can see and know what you're doing, where you're going, right? Again, Instagram tied back to Twitter so that everything was all connected, and you could see where I was going. Now, special projects. So one day, I was sitting around, my good friend Dave was sitting up here, and I don't really remember how the puzzle bomb came about, but we like to do puzzles at my house. And sometimes they're not quite as simple. These are really small puzzles, and the puzzle pieces are quite large. And so they're really easy to do. And so, but we would do more difficult puzzles at my house. And so somehow the idea was born for the puzzle bomb that, basically I had done so many puzzles, right? And so I had all these boxes around my house of puzzles, and I wanted to figure out a way that I could sort of recycle the puzzle, but also make it a game, right? So we'd sit together at my house, put the puzzle together. I pass the completed puzzle over to Dave, and then Dave starts drawing on the top of it, right? And he came up with Hipster Bunny, super cute, right? So then we would, after he, I don't have a picture of the back, darn it. So after we did that, then we would flip the puzzle over, and on the back of the puzzle, we would write all of this information, which is basically saying, this is a hashtag puzzle bomb essay, and talking about what you had to do. It was completely free. We would put the puzzles out into a park somewhere, like San Pedro Springs, or eventually I would put them around events, right? Like, the Maverick Fest that happened, we did a couple down there. So the idea behind that in social media is in using your hashtags and keywords always. It's so important to use your hashtags and your keywords always. And if you can connect what you're doing to an event that's happening like the Maverick Fest, then you can use their hashtags and their keywords, and that's only going to give your information and your images a bigger audience, right? So basically, if I'm tweeting about this puzzle bomb and I use, like the CM Talk Series hashtag, then that basically files my tweet into that CM Talk Series hashtag, and then anybody who searches for that is going to find my information too. So basically, keywords and hashtags are so important because they basically give your information to sort of a wider audience and a wider group that you may not have thought of before, right? So always use your hashtags and your keywords. So we would crumble up the puzzle, put it back in the box, duct tape the box, put the instructions also on the outside of the box, and then go put it somewhere. So it wasn't very well hidden, right? It was just out there in this, big pot. But the point was, we wanted to make it easy for people to get to you. So then we would check in, right? Puzzle Bomb essay, Hipster Bunny is there, come and get it, right? And so the point was really like, come get the puzzle, put it back together, send me a picture, and then I'll know that sort of the circle was complete, right? And so really it was just a way for us to kind of like recycle some puzzles, but also, you know, get the word out there in terms of hashtags and such. But the thing that I did not expect from this whole project was a bump in my Twitter followers. So that was something that was really unexpected. So this project ultimately for me was really a way to increase my Twitter followers. And, you know, of course, Instagram as well, because once you start using, again, those hashtags and keywords, people pay attention. And so then people go and they look up Puzzle Bomb essay and they want to see what's happening, right? So again, if you're looking to increase your social media followers, then sometimes it might be useful for you to think of some sort of a deal or something, you know, some sort of like return on investment basically that you can offer to people so that they will in turn, you know, check out your stuff. Yes, sir?
I hashtag my art when people modern art.
All right.
They no longer let me do it.
Oh, but do you use the whole MoMA or? Wow.
Cartoons, juxtapose.
And they don't let you do that either? Interesting. Well, I still encourage the use of hashtags. You know what also you could do is, are you just using hashtags or you're actually using like,
I went up on their feed and they got this.
oh, because then you must have used like their Twitter symbol or something.
Yeah, they used everything.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, a lot of times, most of the time, if you use like hashtag MoMA, then that won't get you in trouble. But if you use like the @ symbol and MoMA, that's gonna, you know, that will immediately go right to them and that's basically like you're sending them a note, right? So they can get rid of that much quicker than they can the hashtag. So that's another good tip, thank you for that, is to, again, use hashtags and not Twitter handles.
How many followers?
Oh gosh, hundreds of thousands, yeah. Yeah, at least.
Mine lit up, but then like about 5 minutes later, I couldn't post anything else with it. I was like, all right, whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's good. They know what's going on. So to today, then where am I now, right? So social media, these are the things I like to think about sort of on a daily basis. Social media, art in San Antonio, and the art history of San Antonio, right? And I'm trying to hurry now because I know Louis is next and he's hurrying. He wants me to hurry up and get going. So I'm almost done. I just have a few more. So these are all the things that I think about all the time. Social media, art in San Antonio, art history in San Antonio. And I wanted to really think about a way that I could sort of, you know, make all of this happen in one space. So to me, it seemed obvious that a website should occur, right? So the website, basically, the idea behind the website, I think I have that here. It's going to be called lamohawk.com. And it's basically a lot of video content. So the video content really will start with, these are the styles of art in San Antonio. Then, oh, here's an artist who's working in that style of the work. And then, oh, now you can purchase a piece of artwork in that style of work. So the whole point behind the website is really to focus on collectors. Because again, I feel like, you know, you have to sort of talk to people in a certain way to tell them that the art that they're looking at is really good, legitimate work. And that kind of goes back to something Dr. Lopez said earlier, which was basically a lot of times people look at Latino art, contemporary Latino art, and they think that it's folk art, or they think that it's street art, or they think that it's graffiti art. And in reality, it's all of those things, but it's not something to sort of, you know, turn your nose up at, right? It's all valid artwork. And so I think that, you know, putting together a space like this that says, hey, you know what, perhaps this is, you know, graffiti art, but, you know, here is, you know, an intelligent academic explanation of this style of artwork. And again, now here's an interview with an artist who's working in this style of work or art, and then now you can purchase, you know, a work of art. So ultimately, the goal is to sell work on the website, but I think for myself, the main object of the website is really to become an archive and a place where we can really document the artists that have lived and worked and continue to live and work in San Antonio. So I want this to be a place where someone could research and go and search for Vincent Valdez, who we talked about earlier, to say, okay, you know, who was Vincent inspired by? And we can find that information here on this website. And so last, you have to just know what you want and be flexible enough to make it happen, okay? So, if I said to myself a few years ago, like, hey, Chris, you need to get a job at the McNay, and then if I had no ambition beyond that, then I would have accomplished that goal, right? And then where would I be now? But in reality, again, working in the arts, really talking earlier about the idea that there is really sort of a finite amount of jobs in the arts in San Antonio, and I think depending on the city that you live in, then that's really the case, right? But if you are flexible enough to kind of, put yourself into situations where you can still be, in my situation, in the art world, then all the jobs that I have basically are around the art world, and not necessarily do I have to go and work part-time at Wendy's or something, right? Because I'm flexible enough. So basically, this list here are all things that, I've done and that I do. So I currently work at the McNay part-time as their conservation tech, which means I am responsible for maintaining all of the sculpture inside and outside of the building. I have done preparator work there at the McNay and other places around the city. I do arts education work with the McNay and other places around the city. I've done graphic design work at the McNay and other places around the city. Social media strategist. I actually had a contract last year with the Briscoe Museum of Western Art talking about how to really develop the social media for their education department, which is really exciting because they wanted to approach their social media in a way that was more informative and educational versus just, hey, we're having a program Tuesday night, come to this program. So they really were interested in making those connections between social media and their programming, right? So that was a really fun project for me. Art consultant, I help artists sell their work. And really, when I say sell their work, what I like to do, I always like to say I like to know all the artists that I can know, because I meet a lot of collectors, and they ask me, well, do you know somebody who does this kind of work, or do you know somebody who could do this? But I always feel like the more people that I know in terms of artists, then the better chance there is that I can match up an artist with the exact collector that person will need. And then once you kind of make that connection, you can have, an artist that will basically have a benefactor at that point. If you make the right connections, you can really set up a good relationship for someone. And so I really enjoy doing that as well. And then arts advocate. I'm a board member at a local arts nonprofit called San Antonio Cultural Arts, and they do a lot of work with murals on the west side of San Antonio. So it's kind of a lot, and I know we've talked about a lot, but that's basically how I got here, starting back in this mint green room all this time ago. So yeah, that's
Why
it.
art?
Why art?
Why art?
Okay, so when I found out that my husband cheated on me, and I was like, okay, Chris, what are you gonna do with your life, right? Like, you need to go back to school, what's it gonna be? And I thought about all the things that I wanted to do, where I spent my time. My mom actually used to take me to, my mom was a big sort of Chicana activist at one point, and she would go on marches, and she would I remember at one point driving her to a church at like 4 a.m. and leaving her there because she was gonna get on a bus to go, they had this whole group of people that were going to DC to march on DC, right? At that point I remember thinking like, God, Mom, you're such a weirdo. What are you doing? And you're like going by yourself, and you're gonna go march, and who even knows, right? Like, what are you even doing all of this for, right? And she did a lot of work going out to Gaista and, being there in those environments. And so, I really loved Gaista and the work that I saw there. And then when Cheech Marin did his show here, I think it was Chicano Visions, probably like 10 or 11 years ago now. And then that allowed me to I had seen Chicano artwork and contemporary Latino artwork at Gaista, right? And that was kind of on a smaller scale, right? In this sort of a homey type of a gallery space, right? Definitely a small gallery space. And then seeing the same type of artwork now at the San Antonio Museum of Art in these big, beautiful gallery spaces, I was like, whoa, so, somebody who looks like me can actually have their work in a museum, like a big, awesome museum. And that really blew my mind, I guess I hadn't really made the connection at that point. I think maybe like a lot of people thought it's just like folk art or, Latino art, like it's not really valid, right? But for me, seeing Latino art in a museum space validated it for me in a way that really changed the person that I was. And so it became important to me at that point to show all the other brown people that I know that you can be in a museum too, because there are brown people in museums. So that's why art.
Any other questions, comments?
Yay, thank you. I appreciate your time and attention.